We are looking at a poem which was written in the 20th century. The 20th century, that is beginning from 1901, is generally referred to as the modern age. And the modern age is a total breakaway from the Victorian age. Many of the poets of the modern age thought of Victorian age as being an age of hypocrisy. And therefore, they believed that in this age, in the modern age, poetry is going to be far more honest. Can we forget that it was the age of machinery? Can we forget that it was the age of the 2 world wars? And therefore, many of these poets moved away from the external world to an inquiry into the self. Of course, the first name that comes to mind is T.S. Eliot. The other writers, for example, would be the dramatist, the Irish dramatist Bernard Shaw. There would be novelists like Lawrence and Joyce when we talk of the modern age, beginning 1900, and some would say continuing to the present. Father to son, but written by a woman. The poet Elizabeth Jennings, 1926 to 2001. Some critics have compared her to Philip Larkin. Her poems are not autobiographical, but later in life she did have spells of severe depression. She had a very strict Roman Catholic upbringing, and probably because of that, she felt a little stifled. She wrote a great number of poems which were collected and published in 30 collections. Some of her well-known poems are Admonition, Sequence in a Hospital, influenced by Auden and Hopkins. Many of her poems do take us into those areas where the poets became famous, though she herself was not so well known or read as much as poets like Auden and Hopkins. The poem begins with an I, and many time when we readers look at the I, we think of the poem as being autobiographical. Remember, there is always a persona in whose name or under whose impression the poem is being written. Not necessarily autobiographical, because I've already told you that it is a woman poet. I do not understand this child, though we have lived together now in the same house for years. I know nothing of him, so try to build up a relationship from how he was when small. So here is a father who's looking at the grown-up child or a growing up child and feeling bad that he does not know his son. Probably many a parent has the same feeling, and we refer to this as the generation gap. We live together. Physically, there is proximity because we live in the same house. But I've not been able to build a relationship, the father says. Yet have I killed the seed I spent or sown it where the land is his and none of mine. The world he inhabits today, my son, seems to be very different from the world where I live today, the land which I inhabit. Usually, when you think of a seed, you think of it growing into a tree, and then you think of the shade that it offers. But here it seems as if there is no shade of the Father in which the Son can grow. We speak like strangers. There's no sign of understanding in the air. This child is built by my design, yet what he loves I cannot share. Have I not grown along with my child? Is probably what the father is asking himself. Have I not learned to appreciate the things that he loves? Am I responsible for this growing distance? Silence surrounds us. I would have him prodigal, returning to his father's house, the home he knew, rather than see him make and move his world. There's something in the father that makes him want to hold on to the child, not give him the freedom which probably the child desires. And then there is an allusion to the story in the Bible, which all of us know, of the prodigal son. How the son left home. The other son stayed at home, was a good son to his father. But when the son who had left home came back, the father ordered that the largest sheep be killed. I think it was sheep, I'm not sure what animal it was, and that the mutton should be served because the son has come back. The prodigal son. There the son came back. Will my son not come back? Why does he want to create a home of his own? Somehow you want to hold on to your apron strings probably. When it's a woman, that's what we say. I would forgive him too, shaping from sorrow a new love. I would forgive him provided he comes back. But does the son want to come back? Is he going to come back? Father and son, we both must live on the same globe and the same land. He speaks. I cannot understand myself. Why anger grows from grief? We each put out an empty hand, longing for something to forgive. I think it is so sad. Even when the parent realizes that he should probably go ahead and stretch the hand first so that the son can hold it, he is not able to do it. Because instead of sorrow, instead of grief, instead of sense of loss, what the father feels here is anger. I cannot understand myself. He's asking himself, why do I feel anger when what I should be feeling is grief? Grief that my son has moved far away from me. It's interesting because, as I said earlier, it's a woman poet, so maybe a mother, but the poem is about father to son. Would I be politically incorrect if I say that the same distance does not exist between a mother and a son? No, I cannot make a statement like that. But I'm just wondering, as I read this poem towards the end, where it's the father who can't understand why he's allowing this distance to grow. And therefore, I love the last two lines which says, we each put out an empty hand, longing for something to forgive. What wrong has my son done? Why should I think that I need to forgive him? Why don't I instead feel sorrow at what I have done? How I am responsible for this growing distance is what the father seems to be saying. Optimistic listeners, will there be a reconciliation? Pessimistic listeners, do you think this is going to continue forever and ever? In a poem, which is more like a dialogue, like a conversation, like a thinking within, what one notices is that there's no real rhyme scheme. It seems as if when you are talking, you really can't talk in poetry, can you? So there is no rhyme scheme. There are, of course, metaphors which we know when he talks about the seed, for example, killing the seed, he says. There is allusion when he refers to the prodigal son of the Bible. There is irony, a very sad line in the poem when the father says, though we have lived together now in the same house for years, I do not understand this child. Physical proximity does not mean emotional understanding. That is the irony in that line. Also remember that probably it is a universal experience and we should not be misguided by the word I. When I read a poem like Father to Son, and I look at the generation gap, I keep wondering, have I read any other poem like that? Maybe not like that, but there is a poem, Father to Son, and I'm taking you back to the Elizabethan era, to the Bard of Avon, to William Shakespeare, and one of his greatest plays, Hamlet. There's a character, Polonius, not much loved, but do read Polonius's advice to his son Laertes. A different kind of poem, but certainly one that should be read. So happy reading to all of you.